Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 52 of the ITSM crowd. If we were doing one every week, that would be a full year, but it's taken us a little bit longer to get there. Our topic today is an Itil 4 deep dive. So the new version of Itil has probably been one of the hottest topics in service management that I can remember, certainly. And we're really, really happy to say now that the embargo has been lifted. We can talk about the content, and we've got some real experts here to help us do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is ask our panel to introduce themselves. So working from left to right on my screen, Akshay, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. Hi, everyone. My name is Akshay. I'm Product Ambassador for Itil at Axelos. I've been in the service management space for about 20-ish years. I think I hit 20 last year. I've been part of the lead architect team for Itil 4. Outside of all things Itil, as you can see, big comic book lover, also a big heavy metal fan. So if anyone wants to debate those topics about, you can find me on Twitter at Blowboy, BLOREBOY.
Thank you very much. And Doug.
Hi, everyone. I'm Doug Tedder. I am the American on this particular panel, apparently. Like Akshay, I've been in service management now for about 20 years or so. Been an independent consultant now for about the last 6. Really eager to see what Itil 4 brings to the market. I've been anticipating this for a while since participating in the beta session. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, I have a very creative name. It's at Doug Tedder, all one word.
That means you got in early enough to bag your own name. That's good. That early
yes.
Twitter. And Stuart.
Hello, everyone. My name's Stuart Rance. I'm an independent consultant, trainer, author. I do IT service management and information security management, and I have the best job in the world. I just enjoy myself. I've been involved in writing Itil 4. I was also involved in Itil Practitioner and various other things before that. And let's just get on with it, eh?
Thank you very much, Stuart. So you're right, we do have only 30 minutes to talk today, so it's good to get cracking. My name's Claire Agutter. I'm going to be the host for today's session, and if you've got any questions that you want to put to the panel, I will be keeping an eye on Twitter, so anything that you want to ask them, use the hashtag ITSM crowd, and then we'll pick those up and we'll put those to the panel while they're live. So the first question I'm going to put to you, Akshay, initially, which is just to tell us a little bit about the background to the Itil 4 project, because Itil 3 was released in 2007, updated in 2011, and the messaging at that time was fairly clear that this will be the last iteration of Itil, and we were encouraged to kind of talk about Itil and drop the version numbers. So what was behind the decision to create a new version of Itil?
I think primarily it's down to the fact that as technologies evolve, new ways of working have emerged, which new ways of working not only in things like software development, for example, but they have a profound effect on how service management needs to be organized and managed and executed. The new ways of working also have introduced various cultural changes, which are definitely creating tension, to be frank, between various communities within IT and IT service management. But it was also to take some of the good things that have been published thus far. For example, in Itil Practitioner, which came out in 2016 that Stuart just talked about, we had a lot of positive comments and feedback around things like the guiding principles. And we realized that these were things that we wanted people to learn about at a very foundational level, rather than waiting to progress up to a certain point before they encountered the guiding principles. So there was a great desire to sort of re-architect the learning journey as well, and in doing so, address some of these changes that have emerged in IT service management in the last 5 to 10 years.
And I think, Doug, I'm just going to bring you in at this point here as well, because you've been working as a consultant and a trainer. Does that reflect your experience in the market?
Yeah, I think it's true. Itil has always been, in my opinion, just a great set of advice and common sense. And really, the way that I've always tried to apply ITIL is think about what it is that you want to do, and then see what ITIL advice has for you. But a lot of people tended to look at it very black and white. They looked at it very prescriptively, even though we talk about it being not prescriptive. And so then it's very hard to kind of defend ITIL, especially as Akshay kind of alluded to, in the emergence of new technologies and new ways of working and doing. I always said, there's always room for everything, and ITIL is just great guidance, but a lot of people didn't look at it that way. So I was really happy to see what ITIL 4 is doing and how it is, kind of embracing these other ways and new ways of doing things.
Yeah, and I think that would reflect some of the things that we see with our training delegates at ITSM Zone as well. We see a lot more students who want to learn ITIL, but also want to learn DevOps and Agile and Lean, and they need to kind of find a way to understand how all these things fit together, which I think maybe is what you were alluding to there, Akshay, with the kind of the inter-community tension.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key points that Doug just made, it's a great point. It's never meant to be a single framework. There's no single silver bullet that will fix all your woes, that will address all the challenges that a modern IT organization faces. That's something that we've tried to reflect in ITIL 4 as well. So it's great that people are taking these journeys, and I think as a community we should try to make sure that people have, if you will, a well-rounded education, sort of equivalent to the liberal arts that they have in the US. That you learn a little bit about ITIL, you learn a little bit about, let's say, Scrum, you learn a little bit about DevOps, you learn a little bit about Lean, and you bring all these different perspectives to bear when actually doing your work. Otherwise, you're just going to continue the great frameworks war that we've seen for the last 5 years.
Yes, we don't want any more of that. Stuart, so I'm going to bring you in at this point. You've been involved as a member of the lead architect group.
Yep.
So if you could maybe explain to us a little bit about some of the key differences between ITIL version 3 and ITIL 4.
Sure. The first thing I'll say is that most of the really good stuff in ITIL v3 is still just as valid as it ever was. If you want some detailed guidance on what steps you might have in an incident management process flow, or how you might prioritize work or stuff like that, then yeah, pick up your ITIL v3 books, and there's great stuff in there, which I'm not going to knock. But having said that, the structure of ITIL v3 tended to encourage some types of behavior which haven't done people any favors. It didn't say you should work in silos. It didn't say you should have lots of different queues for each type of thing that ITIL described. It didn't say you should have separate functional groups for each thing it described. It didn't say you should focus solely on process and ignore all the other things around it. But for some reason, largely because of the structure of how it was written, people took those ideas. So although we said adopt and adapt, and by adopt we meant just take the bits that work for you, and by adapt we meant and then change them so they work in your environment, we didn't give people enough guidance on how to adopt and adapt, and they didn't really know. It's not an intuitive thing. So they tended to adopt as written and then say you have to do it this way because on paragraph 7 on page 42 it says so, even though paragraph 7 on page 42 said here is an example. So what we've done now is moved to a much less prescriptive view and to an architecture which encourages people to build end-to-end value streams, where at the beginning of every value stream there is some kind of opportunity or demand, and at the end of every value stream there is value both for the customers and the service provider and all of the other stakeholders involved, because anything that doesn't deliver value for all of the stakeholders is not going to last long. What do I mean by all of the stakeholders? Well, if the service provider is not making reasonable profits out of a service, it's not going to last long. If the customer's not getting value out of the service is not going to last long. But, you know, if the regulator isn't being satisfied, the service isn't going to last long. If the shareholders aren't getting what they expect. So you need to look at value holistically. And in fact, you need to look at everything holistically. You need to avoid building up an incident queue, a change queue, a problem queue, or this queue, a release queue, or the other queue, and actually say, what is it that goes all the way from demand to value, and how can I optimize that journey for my customers, for my users, and for everybody else involved? And I guess the detail of the architecture we may go into later on this call if we have time, but that's the intent behind the design.
And I think if it's okay, Stuart, I would like to kind of dig into the detail a little bit more, because there will be a lot of people who haven't seen the book yet. So one of the things that jumped out to me as a fairly significant change, although you can see the evolution behind it, is this introduction of the service value system and the associated value chain. So I wondered if you wouldn't mind explaining that one a little bit, please.
Gosh, the reason I'm looking bemused is because this is tough without a diagram. So just imagine in your mind's eye a big diagram that starts on the left with opportunity and demand and ends on the right with value. And in between, in a sort of a complex interrelationship, we have the guiding principles, which I hope we get a chance to talk about, but this is how you adopt and adapt ITIL. And balancing that, we have continual improvement, which comes, you know, from the same place as, you know, the Toyota improvement cutter and lots of other ideas of improvement has to be part of how you live. On the old ITIL v3, people used to come to me and say, we're going to do ITIL, what process shall we do first? And they always expected me to give them the consultant's answer of it depends. And I never did. I said, start with continual improvement. If you know where you are and you know what's not working well enough, you've got a chance.
Most people thought I would say incident. Most people I spoke to looking for incident, problem, or change.
Yeah, and they weren't expecting continual improvement. But invariably, if you're not doing continual improvement, it's where you have to start. And if you are, you wouldn't be asking me the question. So within this frame, and again, joining opportunity to value, we have governance, which is you have to look to how is IT governed. It doesn't stand alone. It's part of some larger enterprise, whether it's internal or external services. And also we have practices. I'm going to talk about the practices later, but you can think of them just for a minute as the old ITIL v3 processes on steroids. And then right in the middle of this value system, and the main part of it is something we call the service value chain. And that is, if you like, an update to the old ITIL service lifecycle. So the service value chain always starts with engage. Engage is how you communicate with all of your different stakeholders. So engage is your service desk, finding out what it is that your users want and updating your users and making sure that your users get the value they expect. Engage is your relationship managers talking to your customers and understanding their needs. Engage is your supplier managers talking to your suppliers. It's all of the activities you do that engage with external stakeholders. And then we have plan. You can think of that as a bit like ITIL service strategy. It's what you do to, you know, it's how you manage your portfolio. It's how you create plans for creating value. And we have
assign resources.
Sorry?
Assign resources.
Yeah,
ensure it's moving in the right direction.
All of that stuff. Then you have improve, which is what it sounds like. It's the fact that you have to have improve in everything you do. And then at the core of it, there's what I like to think of as the engine, the internally focused, what we do to make things happen. That's design and transition. And if you've ever been involved in ITIL before, I don't think I have to tell you what design and transition is, but it's basically taking your plan and turning it into something that you do. There's deliver and support, which is running IT. It's making sure that people get the value out of it. And then there's a new thing for the life cycle, which we call obtain build. And this is recognizing the fact that most IT service management organizations don't create the components from which they build services. So obtain build might cover your DevOps, CI/CD type of activity. It might cover your procurement activities. It might cover how do you relate to the cloud services that you're building. But it's basically how you get the components that you build your services out of. So that's 6: engage, plan, improve, design and transition, deliver and support, and obtain build. And the key thing about them, and the big way they differ from the old life cycle, is there's no order between them. We don't say you always start with engage, then you do plan, then you do. It's kind of, you build your own value streams based on the practices. So the practices are things like incident management, problem management, change control, release management, deployment management, and so on. And you build value streams to achieve the things that you need to achieve. And every value stream goes from demand to value. So, for example, if a user has an incident, and on ITIL v3, we'd say incident management deals with that. Well, if you look at what actually happens, service desk starts dealing with it before they even know it's an incident. So that's a bit of engagement activity, which isn't really incident management yet, although it might become incident management soon. It's service desk activity. And then maybe you have a bit of incident management activity doing diagnosis and what have you. Then you might have, I don't know, a bit of problem management activity looking for root causes, or you might have a bit of change management activity, or you might have a bit of asset management activity if you've got to swap something, or you might have a bit of configuration management activity if you've got to configure something correctly before you give it to a user. So incident management doesn't provide an end-to-end value for the customer. It's got to fit in with all of the other practices that work together to make that value. And at the end, you should be measuring, did we deliver value? And that's just for a simple, trivial incident. And that's why we've moved to this value streams running across a value chain model, which is more complex, but more true to life, and discourages the building of individual queues and silos and encourages a focus on end-to-end value.
Well, the thing I like about it, if I could step in, it really starts to position this as systems thinking. And it really starts to dispel this thing that I constantly ran into when I was doing ITIL v3 instruction, which was, and you kind of alluded to it, but the sequential nature of talking about the old v3 life cycles. Oh my gosh, we got to start with strategy, and then we got to go to, and I would just, no, you start where you are, amazingly enough. And then if you don't know where to start, go to CSI. But then you're going to go back and forth, and you're going to, all the way back. It's really about what is it that you deliver at the end of the day that is valuable to the business or the organization or that kind of thing. And so I like the new architecture. I really do. I see a lot of semblance to, I recognize enough of the old things that were there, so we have some familiarity. But in a lot of ways, we've got to rethink how we think about service management, and that's where I think ITIL 4 helps.
Yeah.
For me, I think, sorry. So for me, I think the most exciting thing that the service value chain offers is we can truly start talking about what is minimum viable service management. I mean, we've had this the great concept of minimum viable product that's come out of software development and lean startup and all that sort of stuff. But you can extend that sort of thinking and saying, what is the least amount of work we have to do from a service management standpoint in order to create the outcomes that we want? And so if you start mapping your value stream as your journey through the service value chain, going back and forth, etc., but you always start with demand, you always finish with value. You start to identify what bits of each practice you need. So I need incident management to be able to do this for me over here. I need it to do that for me over there, and so on. And as you scale that across multiple value streams, which are essentially scenario-based journeys, once you start to scale that through the value stream, you will come out at the other end saying, my incident management only needs to do these 10 things. It doesn't need to do anything else. So regardless of what examples the book might have, regardless of whether you think that example workflow is the workflow, etc., you're adapting and adopting off the guidance to these value streams tells you that your incident management only needs to be able to do these 10 things and nothing more. So we can finally start to talk about what is minimum viable service management, in fact.
In that context, I'd like to add something, Claire, for people who haven't yet seen the full story of what's happening with ITIL. What's being published and made available this month is a new ITIL 4 ITIL Foundation publication, which is not very big. It's actually shorter than the previous ITIL books. It's, hang on, less than 200 pages, including the index, and the corresponding ITIL Foundation exam. Now, this book, for each of the practices we've been talking about, things like incident management and change control, only has about 3 or 4 pages. It's the minimum viable book. Having said that, I'm dead serious. What you won't find in here is the workflow for incident management. Here is all of the roles you should have for change control. Those things were only ever meant to be examples. They are going to get published. You will find ITIL incident management being published with, many more pages with lots of examples in. Hopefully we won't examine what is the workflow and what are the roles. What we're going to examine at Foundation is the 2 or 3 pages in this book, which is what are the core concepts of incident management. Later, there will be more ITIL books. There will be something published on each practice, and there will also be some things that go across this value chain. So there'll be a book that focuses more on the engage part of the value chain and one that focuses more on the plan and improve part of the value chain.
And there's another key point related to that, Stuart, which is what we've written in the book is essentially the reference architecture for ITIL.
Yes.
It allows us to build up all the subsequent levels of guidance. So although we may have, n number of practices described in the foundation book, Claire, what students will learn about is the really core stuff that they would be engaged in as an entry-level professional in the world of service management. So they'll be learning about things like incident management, problem, change control, etc. One of the things that I alluded to earlier is changing the learning journey with ITIL 4. And one of the things that I think we all felt as lead architects when we came together last year, or back in 2017, I think it was, Stuart, was students at foundation level are perhaps focusing on the wrong things. We want them to focus on things like the guiding principles. We want them to focus on things like, what's the sort of big systems view look like, rather than having to learn each of these practices at a foundation level. As they progress their learning journey, they will find out about those things. But what we've written in Foundation is essentially our reference architecture. So now, as we're developing all the future levels, we can go back to the book and say, so what exactly did we say about change control? Why did we word it the way or what are the exact words we used when we talked about change control? That's what we build off of.
Okay, we've got a question that's coming on Twitter from Jamie Bell, and he's just asking, what's the difference between a value stream and a value chain in ITIL 4?
Oh, please, miss, can I answer that one?
Please do.
A value chain is a set of 6 very specific activities. You can think of them as archetypes. Engage means we talk to external stakeholders. Plan means we make plans. And by archetypes, I mean, they're not the specific things that you do, they're the types of things that you do. When you actually do the work or plan the work, you have a very specific value stream, and every organization will have many of these. And each value stream is a journey across that value chain. So there are 2 ways you can do this. You could say, when we are going to create a new service, what does our value stream look like? And you create a model for creating a new service. And you say, we start with plan, where the first thing we do is the next thing we do is then engage. We engage our marketing people to go out to the market and understand what demand we don't know about. Then that goes back to plan, where we look at the portfolio, we look at the costs, we look at this. Right, from there it goes back to engage, to evaluate. So you can build up a whole value stream of how do we create a new service that goes in a complex journey across your value chain. A completely different value stream might be, how do we respond to a customer request for a new feature? It will still involve plan, design, but it's different. It's not the same journey. So each journey is a value stream. Now, there's 2 types of value streams. Those that I've described, model value streams. This is how we think we ought to do it. The other thing comes from Lean, if you're familiar with value stream mapping, where you say, what do we actually do? When something breaks, who detects it first? What do they do? Who do they speak to? What do they do? And you can actually build up a value stream of what you actually do.
Mm-hmm.
And often that's very different to the value stream built by the planners and managers of what they think they do. And one of the things that Improve should be involved in is, how do we optimize the actual value streams and get them closer to the models that we thought we would, or maybe modify the models so that they support the actual activity. So,
well, you can still map the actual the real life value streams and still overlay that with your 6 archetypes to understand how you're going about doing things.
Absolutely. So to answer the question, the value chain is a fixed set of 6 archetypal actions that you might take. And the value stream is a journey through those 6 activities to achieve a very specific value based on a very specific type of demand.
Perfect. Thank you. And Jamie, I hope that answers your question for you. So I'm kind of coming towards the end of our time, so I'm going to merge a couple of questions and come to you, Doug, first, to just ask about some of the reactions that you've had to ITIL 4 so far. Are your customers liking what they see?
Well, to be candid, what I'm hearing is, what is ITIL 4? And so part of that is I understand we've had to keep it under wraps for a while, and there's been some hints in the market about what ITIL 4 is. So I'm hoping that now that we're able to talk about it a bit more, that will start to change it. One of the first things, though, that I am confronted with oftentimes is, ITIL 3 described 26 processes. Now ITIL 4 describes 34 practices. And a practice is not a process, and I can appreciate Stuart's comments that practice is a process on steroids. But I think that's the very first thing that's hit me dead on, is people are confusing practices with processes. I explained that processes support practices, and there are things that we do with incident. I think that was a great example, that aren't necessarily process driven, but we do them anyway. Like a service desk uses good customer service skills. What's a process for that? There is no process. It's a thing that we do. So those are the two kind of first things that are that I'm hearing in the market, or at least in my space, around ITIL 4.
Thank you very much. And Stuart and Akshay, just briefly, kind of next steps in terms of the roadmap for ITIL 4, and just any kind of advice for organisations that are fairly mature in terms of ITIL version 3. What would you advise that they do to start maybe understanding ITIL 4 and what it means to them?
Okay. Stuart, do you want to take the second question? I'll take the
Sure.
I'll take the roadmap. So we're hard at work on the next tranche of guidance that we're writing. We published the new qualification scheme late last year. So we're writing all the guidance that fits and content that fits to that qualification scheme. So each one of those modules that you see in that certification structure is its own book, is its own set of guidance. And that's what we're hard at work writing. And I think the plan is to publish and launch all of them in H2 this year, along with a transition module that will allow people with 17 points or higher in today's V3 scheme to transition across to a designation in the ITIL 4 certification scheme.
Thank you.
Sure,
you want some advice for people who've already fairly mature on ITIL V3 journey? Kind of that depends on exactly where they are. There we are. There's a consultant's answer. But having said that, those who never studied ITIL practitioner should do so now. Or they can pick up the new foundation to give them the bits of ITIL practitioner that have come through to the core of the new ITIL foundation are guiding principles. They've slightly changed, but not out of all recognition, and the new ones are as valid as the old ones. The idea of, I think, the most practical thing in ITIL foundation now is the guiding principles. And that's a real brain challenge for people who think practical means tell me the steps of incident management. But for most people who've been on an ITIL course and they've read the steps of incident management, that's not actually going to help them when they get back to work, because they're going to follow their incident management process in their organization. Yeah. The guiding principles are a set of things that you should print out and stick on the wall. And every time you're having a meeting, or you have a decision to make, or you have to prioritize things, these will help you to get it right. They are things like focus on value. Think about value for your service consumers, for the service provider, for other stakeholders. Start where you are. Don't throw things away, but start with where you are and build on it. Progress iteratively with feedback. Don't try and do something enormous, but take a little step and keep monitoring and keep improving based on feedback. Collaborate and promote visibility. Work with the people around you and make sure that everybody knows what's going on and what's happening, and that you're honest and transparent about it. Think and work holistically. Look at that end-to-end value chain and make sure you're not optimizing locally in a way that makes things worse overall. Keep it simple and practical. Just do what you need to do to create the value. Don't do lots of unnecessary work. And finally, and the one guiding principle that's completely new for ITIL 4, optimize and automate, which is interesting. We say, get rid of all manual work that you sensibly can, but before you do that, optimize it. Don't automate something that's inefficient. Make it more efficient first and then automate it. If people stick that up on the wall and follow it, they will be doing, and that just take that bit of ITIL 4 to go with their mature ITIL 3. I think they'll be doing a fabulous job.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. That's been a really good dive into a little bit more of the actual content of ITIL 4. So hopefully that's been useful to everybody who's watching. We will put a blog up with just a quick recap of the session today, and we'll share that. And also on the ITSM Zone website, you can take our introductory ITIL 4 course, ITIL Lite, for free until the end of March. So if you go to the ITSM Zone site, you will find that link too from the homepage as well. So all that remains for me to say is thank you to everybody who's been watching. Thank you to Akshay, to Doug, and to Stuart. And we will see you on the next episode of the ITSM Crowd, when we are going to talk about gamification. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for hosting that, Claire. It was enjoyable.